Good evening, everyone. My name is Sandra Dennis. I'm the Executive Director of the Miami Workers Center. We're a member-led power building organization. We organize with tenants, domestic workers, nannies, house cleaners, and home health aides here in Miami-Dade County. We are so overjoyed this evening to be joined by our movement ecosystem partners who are going to be talking about what just happened in the Florida Legislature this year, 2023. We believe it is important for our communities, our base, to know how these laws are impacting them, how the people that we vote for, how they are voting as well, but also what we can do about it. And so we're joined by some of our favorites, and we're going to turn to them to introduce themselves. So we'll start with AJ from the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. My name is AJ Hernandez Anderson, she, her, and I'm a senior supervising attorney with the Southern Poverty Law Center's Immigrant Justice Project, and I am based out of Miami.
Thank you so much. And let's go to Paula Munoz with Florida Immigrant Coalition.
Hi everyone. Super excited to be here with you all. My name is Paula Munoz. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I am with the Florida Immigrant Coalition, and I am based off in Miami.
Thank you, Paula, for being here. And Denise from Community Justice Project.
Good evening, everyone. I am standing in for Denise tonight. My name is Berbeth Foster. I'm a senior staff attorney at Community Justice Project. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and we are also based in Miami. Thanks so much for having us.
I knew that, Berbeth. And I'll turn to Mikhail Saint-Vil with the Office of New Americans, Miami-Dade County.
We're still not unmuting ourselves in 2023. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mikhail Saint-Vil. I am the manager for the legal service at the Miami-Dade County Office of New American, and I am very happy to be here with you guys today.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. I just want to start with a question for you all. What happens at the Florida Legislature? There's so much for us to talk about. But we're going to start with SB 1718. I'm going to turn to AJ to really share what is this bill. There's so many, so much that's being spread in our communities. We don't know. People are questioning the accuracy of it. So we really want to hear from you at the Southern Poverty Law Center about what's in the bill, what should people be aware of. Yeah.
Yes, there is a lot of confusion. And part of this is because there are so many sections to the bill. I think the section that is probably at the top of everyone's mind is the changes to the Florida human smuggling statute. And that basically changes the statute to make it a third-degree felony to knowingly and willfully transport into the state of Florida any person who, one, entered the U.S. in violation of the law, and two, has not been inspected by the federal government since entering unlawfully. So the most important thing to remember is that this applies to transportation into the state and across state lines. So for example, when you're driving or traveling from Alabama or Georgia into Florida, and probably also by means of water as well. That would be another possibility. And the shorthand that has been used throughout the legislative session, it has been referring to transporting someone who's undocumented into the state, but that is not actually 100% correct, because this law says the person who's being transported is if it's someone who entered in violation of the law and has not been inspected. It's very possible that someone could be undocumented at this point, but they entered lawfully and they were inspected and admitted when they entered the US. For example, someone who overstayed their visa. So it's very deceiving, and it's not going to be easy to be able to determine who, quote unquote, has not been inspected, because that's not the way federal immigration law refers to the term inspection. So it is confusing, but the most important thing to remember is that it is likely to be most applicable probably in instances crossing state lines. So what would that look like? It might look like what we see now at the Alabama state line with lots of Florida Department of Law Enforcement cars patrolling highways like they have been over the last year or two. If anyone is concerned about their whether this applies to them or their family members or friends or anybody who they might be driving across state lines into the state, then what I have been recommending is that folks should contact a licensed immigration attorney and clarify their status, what type of documentation would show what their status is, and whether or not the attorney thinks this law would apply to them, because there's so many different possibilities as to when this law could apply, and it's unclear how law enforcement and prosecutors are going to interpret this law and who exactly they're going to apply it to. So those are some of the most important key points to remember. However, it's important to also remember how this is not going to impact everyone's day-to-day. And that's not going to be, it's not going to involve day-to-day transportation within the state of Florida. For example, getting an Uber to go to a friend's house, school buses, driving a friend to work, or taking public transportation inside the state of Florida. Likewise, traveling by air into the state shouldn't change because that is determined by TSA, which is a federal agency. They're the ones who decide who can go, as they're going through security. Whenever we take an airplane, they decide who's going to make it through security and to the gate, right? So that is the basic summary of the human smuggling statute, which I think is one of the big ones. There are two other sections that I think have a lot of confusion. The second one I think that has a lot of folks really concerned is the hospital data collection section. And that section requires hospitals that receive Medicaid to inquire and ask about every patient's immigration status. So how would you see that on a day-to-day basis? First is it's going to be on patient admission forms and registration forms. This new law requires that these patient admission and registration forms ask a question, a new question that asks, is the patient a U.S. citizen, lawfully present in the U.S., or not lawfully present in the U.S.? But the forms also are going to be required by this new law to also include two very important statements that everyone should keep in mind and remember. Is one, the response to this question will not affect patient care. And two, the response to this question will not result in any report to immigration authorities. So those two statements should also be on the form when people see this new question pop up. And this has to do only with hospitals. This doesn't have to do with your regular doctor that you might go for a checkup, or if you think you have the flu. It doesn't have to do with an urgent care or a pediatrician's office. It only applies to hospitals that receive Medicaid, and that's it. And so what's going to happen with this information is the total number of hospital admissions and emergency department visits. Those are going to be reported to the Agency for Healthcare Administration. It's not supposed to include identifying information, but it's just supposed to include those numbers and also information as to whether the patient was a U.S. citizen, lawfully present, not lawfully present, or they declined to answer. So the law anticipates that people will choose not to answer this question as to their immigration status. So if there is an option to decline to answer, we should all take it. And that's important whether you're a U.S. citizen or not. Because, if you're a U.S. citizen and you choose that you're not going to answer the question, that means that the rest of the questions everyone else who might be declining to answer, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the total number of people who are undocumented, right? And it's also important to remember that the response that you provide is not supposed to affect patient care, and it's not supposed to result in any report to immigration authorities. So those are important things to remember. And then I'll just close with the third piece that I think a lot of people have been asking questions about, and that's with regard to community IDs and driver's licenses. So out-of-state driver's licenses that are issued to a class that go only to undocumented immigrants, those are not going to be valid in the state anymore and could result in a charge for driving without a license. So folks who may have one of these driver's licenses from, I think it's 16 different states, provide them Puerto Rico and DC. If you have a license from this category in one of those states, that is no longer going to be considered a valid license, and you could be charged with driving without a license. And then last, the governor's press release, when he signed this bill, incorrectly stated that community IDs are not valid anymore, but that is wrong. The law itself, the statutory changes in this bill only restrict the funding by a county or a municipality. It doesn't say anything about the validity of community IDs. And these IDs are super important for the immigrant community, as well as those in many other different situations who are unable to get a state issued ID. So those IDs are still valid. The programs are still valid. They just they cannot be funded by a county or municipality anymore. So I'll leave it at that, because I think those are the three biggest areas of confusion as to this law.
Thank you so much, AJ. I'm just going to invite Paula to come right in and talk about what are rights of immigrants in this moment? How can people protect themselves and their families?
Thank you, Sandra. So I definitely, with a lot of what AJ say, there's been a lot of misinformation that goes on, right? So definitely folks still have their rights, right? Their constitutional rights. They have the right to remain silent, right? And only give a name as asked. They have a right to legal representation and speak with a lawyer or consulate in case of anything. They have a right not to sign anything without counsel or without understanding what document they're reading, right? So you have a right not to sign things. You also have a right to know why you're being detained in the case of, any type of detention. And also the right to verify that there's a judicial warrant with correct information. I know there's been a lot of fear about folks being detained in different reasons at workplaces. Those rights are still valid right now, that they need to have warrants, judicial warrants. Otherwise, their employers are able to negate the entry from ICE or the federal agents they can't go in without warrants. Same with households. So those constitutional rights still stand regardless of this bill, and folks should be empowered by their rights, right? Also, they have rights, like AJ mentioned, they have rights to be able to seek healthcare and medical care. Just because of this bill doesn't mean that they're going to be turned away at hospitals, or they shouldn't be turned away at hospitals, right? When it comes to, if they decline to answer any information about status, right? Folks still should be able to seek hospital care and emergency care as well. And they have rights to have community IDs, right? That there's nothing in this bill that says that your community ID that has been issued is not valid, right? Community IDs are still being issued. There's actually a drive coming this month that we're doing with Miami Worker Center. And so those are still valid, right? There's a lot of misinformation going around that around community IDs and, other things. So just for folks to be really grounded on the fact that they do have constitutional rights in the state, and that they also, again, have they still are able to protect themselves with those rights. And any case that there's violation of rights, that's where definitely connecting with organizations locally, with lawyers, that's something that right now we are trying to be able to pinpoint where these these violation of rights are happening because they shouldn't be, especially because the law isn't even enacted, and we're hearing a lot of things like that. Also, that this bill does not impact tenants, right? Like a lot of folks we're getting calls about people getting kicked out because supposedly of this bill. Like, since the harboring piece got taken out, like it should not impact the folks living in locations or getting kicked out by landlords. If that's happening because of this bill, like, or they're claiming that it's because of this bill, it's complete lie, and folks should seek immediate counsel around that. So those are just some of the rights that folks absolutely have, and that again, like they shouldn't be pushed back into the shadows, right? Like that's what these narratives want us to think, right? Like they're doing these things on purpose to put people in fear, to push people out. And that is something that, like, that's how we empower ourselves, is by knowing our rights, and that we still are able to be here, and that we have networks of protection as much as we can have, right? And so definitely folks should be empowered by their rights, their constitutional rights.
Thank you, Paula. I'm just going to ask you one more time to give just a quick overview of folks' constitutional rights. You named that people have a right to know why they're being detained, that they have a right to see the warrant. Can you just go over that one more time? Yes,
of course. Just like 5 quick rights that folks can remember, right? You have a right to remain silent and only give your name when stopped, when especially if you're not driving a vehicle, right? If you're in a passenger seat, they shouldn't be asking you for different identification documents or anything like that. If you're a passenger, if you're walking the street, right, you have your right to remain silent and only have to give your name. You have a right to legal representation and speak to a lawyer or your consulate, right? In the case of immigration, right? That's something that you have a right to do. You have a right not to have to sign documents that you don't understand. So we always, until you're able to get legal advice or counsel, you shouldn't have to sign anything, right? Against, or especially if you don't understand it. And you have a right to know why you're being detained as well, right? Like, and if you're also able to ask, if there's no valid reason, am I free to go, right? You're able to ask that question. And then warrants, right? Like, this is very important, is that you have a right to verify if there is a judicial warrant with your correct information or to enter a home or business. So without a correct warrant, you don't have to give consent to entry or, be intimidated to give consent to entry.
Thank you so much. Deborah, I'm going to come back to you. I want to come to Berbeth Foster with the Community Justice Project, because there's a lot that happens and it's still happening on the immigration front. We know many of folks were mobilizing just yesterday for a day without immigrants, but without looking the state of Florida. And so for sure, always in solidarity, because our folks, majority of them come from immigrant backgrounds. There's a lot happening with tenants as well. So we know coming out of the pandemic and even before the pandemic, that Florida and all in states across the country, that tenants were dealing with condition issues that are beyond deplorable, that we saw price gouging all throughout, specifically in South Florida, but throughout this country as well. And so we saw so much movement, so much action coming from our base to win a tenant bill of rights, to win fair notice, to win right to repair and deduct. And so we also saw backlash through some bills in the state legislature. And so we're going to turn to Berbeth to kind of talk about where are we as it relates to tenants and the bills that came through this session.
Thank you so much, Sandra, again, for having us tonight to talk through these really important tenant issues. I just want to continue to uplift what Paula just said. I just loved that list of constitutional rights and the emphasis that was made on do not consent. Do not consent is waiver to your constitutional rights. And so I just want to just echo that, because that was amazing. Thank you so much for keeping the community informed about their rights. So yeah, the current legislative session has not been good to us, has not been good to community, has really been an unfortunate backlash to all of the wins that we saw here in Miami-Dade County. I think especially, lobbyists, Florida Apartment Association, Florida Realtors really saw the power that communities like ours really had in pushing fair laws that really support tenants, and they don't like that. And so in response to the Tenant Bill of Rights that the community was able to win in solidarity with Miami Workers Center, in response to fair notice, 60-day notice, if your landlord is going to terminate your lease or increase rent. We saw that you all were able to win notice when ownership of a building changes hands. We saw repair and deduct. This is the only county in the state that actually has a law that allows tenants to be able to address conditions issues that their landlords are not addressing, and really creating environments where people are living in really terrible conditions that are just inhumane. And so this county is really the only county in the state that has a repair and deduct ordinance. And so what we saw in response to that was HB 1417, a bill that actually preempts the ability of local governments to pass this sort of protections, tenant protections at the local level. So now what is happening, what preemption means is it is essentially the state stepping in and saying that they are not allowing local government to pass laws that are in the interest of tenants. So everything now has to rest at the state level. The state now gets to determine the breadth and the entirety of the landlord-tenant relationship. So HB 1417 really was a direct response to all of the great organizing that has been done throughout the state, but specifically here in Miami-Dade County. Now that bill has passed in the legislature. It has not yet been presented to the governor or signed by the governor. All of this is procedural. We do anticipate that it is set to go into effect July 1st. We do anticipate that the governor will likely allow it to go through and will not veto the bill. And vetoing a bill is really the only way to stop it from going into law at this stage. So it's not law yet, but we do anticipate, and we are waiting to see what happens with that. In addition, what did pass today, unfortunately, was House Bill 133 has been signed into the law by the governor today. That is a law that essentially changes how security deposits paid by tenants are administered throughout the state. So how it works right now is when you move into a unit or an apartment, you pay a security deposit. And as long as you leave that apartment or that unit, essentially in the same condition that you found it, with no damages beyond normal wear and tear, the law says that you're entitled to get your security deposit back. Your landlord has to give that back to you or give you notice why they think that they're entitled to your security deposit. What House Bill 133 does is actually creates what we deem to be a junk fee. It allows your landlord to pay for what they claim to be an insurance product that will protect them from damages caused by tenants to their unit. Of course, we know that landlords are going to pass that fee onto their tenants. And so you will be paying more. You will essentially be paying for this on behalf of your landlord every month. But the real insidious difference here is this is a product that protects your landlord. It does not protect you as a tenant. So if your landlord believes that you have caused damage to the property, they will get money back from this insurance product that you, the tenant, has paid for, you have paid for, but then that company can still sue the tenant for the money. So you are paying for a product, you could be paying thousands of dollars more for this product than you would have paid under the normal security deposit statute, and have no protection or no ability to not be liable for damages going forward. So it's really a junk fee. It is a product that is set up to line the pockets of companies, corporations. It is a product to protect landlords. It is not a product that will protect tenants in any way, and really acts in a very predatory fashion on everyday people who are working to live and need housing. And so HB 133 has passed, it has been signed, that will go into effect. And if landlords choose to utilize that product, they will have that option going forward. And just the final one that really affects the way that tenants can organize and tenant power throughout the state is Senate Bill 102. This is called the Live Local Act. What was done here to incentivize members of the Florida Legislature to sign for this product is it was packaged as an affordable housing deal that would provide over $700 million of tax incentives to developers to create affordable housing. But then they snuck in this provision. Well, they didn't sneak it in. We all knew it was there. They put in a provision that actually prevents municipalities from passing rent stabilization and rent control. And again, that was a direct response to the work that communities and Miami Worker Center and organizers all throughout the state have been calling for, a cap on rent increases, as we've seen throughout the pandemic and after the pandemic, the just exorbitant price gouging of landlords on tenant communities to try to recoup as much dollars and really maximize their profits from corporate landlords and hedge funds that are coming into the state. And so there was really great organizing being done throughout the state to really push a demand, and rent control and rent stabilization actually did pass on the local level in Orange County. And so there was really an opportunity there for other communities to step into the space and demand the same thing, but that has now been preempted, and there is no ability anymore for local governments to pass any form of rent stabilization or rent control. And so we have seen a loss of so many tenant rights and so many opportunities for tenants to get the kind of housing that they deserve throughout the state. And so this legislative session has been really harmful to the concept and to the efforts of protecting tenants.
Really, really helpful. Thank you so much, Berbeth. I'm going to start by kind of sharing. I'm sure there's going to be some questions for some of the members of the Miami Worker Center who are here right now, but I want to start with some resources in terms of what we're doing in the face of this horrible legislative session, how we're still organizing tenants, how we're still ensuring that people understand what resources are available to them. And so again, the people, tenants all over Miami-Dade County went to budget hearings, advocated for eviction diversion program. $2.9 million of our dollars are going to be used to connect tenants to attorneys, but also to ensure that we can stop the rate of evictions in our communities, decrease the rate of displacement. And that's a partnership between Legal Services of Greater Miami, Community Justice Project, Cuban American Bar Association, Haitian Lawyers Association, and Welke D. Ferguson Law Association. And so again, we are knocking doors all over Miami-Dade County, ensuring that people have an opportunity to fight back against their evictions, to stay in their homes, and also to be able to negotiate with their landlords so that it could be a win-win or a win for the community. Because we do believe that communities have a right to stay in their communities, to not have to be displaced, and not to tear apart their social networks. I'm going to come back. And so again, we're so proud of that, because I think that in the middle of horrible from our perspective legislative session. We still see communities coming together to organize, to demand, and to make sure that wherever there is an opportunity for them to ask for everything, to make demands, to make sure that their tax dollars are being put to use, they're continuing to do that. And so that's on the tenant side. I also want to remind folks, specifically folks who are in Miami-Dade County, that there is an Office of Housing Advocacy that we fought for and that we advocated for that continues to be a resource to tenants. And so if you are having an issue as a tenant, to call the Office of Housing Advocacy to help them, to ask them to help you navigate your circumstance in the moment. That again is something that tenants on the ground fought for. We asked for the funding for that. And so we want to make sure that that office is used to the best of its ability. Mikael Deborah, as I know her as Deborah, works for the Office of New Americans, who leads immigrant clinics in this county, who also knows about the resources that exist for immigrants, folks who are migrating here. So I'd love to hear from you, Mikael, what is available for immigrant communities here in this county?
Right now at the Office of New American, one of new initiative is actually doing what we call migrant resource fairs. So of course, what we see and that everyone's noticing is misinformation, right? And people are not able to know what is available to them at the migrant. So definitely those resource fair, we are trying to have them as often as possible. So we already had 2, and this upcoming one is in June 22nd. We partner up with a couple other organizations, legal organization and such, and social service organization. So the point is to have as many services to come and that are able to serve the migrant community. So what seems to happen is an individual come, to the county and they would ask for help, whatever the help is they need, right? But unfortunately, there are restrictions when it comes for help. And most people don't know the difference whether someone is a resident, meaning of Miami-Dade County, or resident of the United States. Simple things like that for not knowing what they qualify for. So we try to get as many social services, vet them and make sure that they are able to offer services to the migrant community. So the next one will be in downtown Miami. So now the flyer is ready, we'll share it with Miami Worker Centers, who are one of our partners, right? So, and during that resource fair, we will also be discussing the new legislative SB 1718. We will have a Know Your Right presentation because there are a lot of misinformation that are out there. I know I definitely forgot your name. I'm sorry. I know that you discussed to be important 3 important things that are in the legislation. In the law right now, right? I wanted to, if you don't mind, point out 2 additional one that a lot of individual and constituents have been calling us about and asking about is the e-verification requirements. So I would like to point out that's another one. It's a federal program, right? So now they are requiring any employers that have more than 25 employees to use this program. I know it's going to affect a lot of employers, but I also want the employees to understand that if you were employed prior to July 1st, 2023, it should not affect you. I can see all the issues that's going to arrive. For example, someone who is currently on TPS Honduras, right? And who do not have a up-to-date work authorization because the card is an automatic extension. E-verification is not going to be able to verify this person employment status. So we can see so many issues that's going to happen to with this new law that requires them to use e-verification for all new employees. However, just want to let everybody know, if you were employed prior, you won't be impacted by this law, right? And workers that are also employed temporary should not be impacted by this law, and private business also. A lot of private business have been calling about that. And the DNA, people have been asking about the DNA portion of it. We want to let people know also with that, if you are stopped for a crime and you are going to be detained, they do have the right to take your DNA. So that's the one thing that unfortunately you cannot say no to. So let's piggyback. I know we talked about the license, right? And the smuggling. So imagine someone having a license in one of those 19 states that allow them to have one. And they came here and to drive in the United States, in Florida on July 2nd. This individual can get stopped, right? This individual can get stopped and get arrested, and they could be subject to a DNA test.
Why are they asking for DNA?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Why are they asking for DNA?
You know, I don't know why they're asking for DNA, but but they are collecting DNA, and you are required to give it, to provide the DNA if you are subject to detention. So that are to those that are subject to detention. And another confusion that's happening is what is considered someone that is unlawful, right? So the definition of an unlawful migrant is not the same as, I guess, the INA, the federal law for immigration. So specifically, they are targeting people who had entered the country that have not been stopped by CBP or who did not report themselves to CBP at the time of entry. So I guess anyone that came in by boat essentially, or to the border walking. So a lot of people that entered and that was stopped by CBP that is currently in removal proceedings, or that have a pending application, who currently do not have a status, fear that those new law affect them or will impact them. So I just wanted to let them know those new law will not be impacting you because you have reported to CBP or you have something pending. So pretty much immigration know that you are in the country. So it's people that enter that have no encounter at all with immigration enforcement. So that will be impacted by this law.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm going to unpin you. I also want to give space for the other panelists to kind of provide additional thoughts before we go into questions. I guess I just want to say one more thing to Deborah's point. She's so humble. I know there's also TPS clinics. There's also clinics that are happening at the Caleb Center Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, every week. And so if folks have questions on their immigration status, if they are questioning whether or not they have TPS, if they have immigration questions, there are attorneys with Catholic Legal Services, Americans for Immigrant Justice. I forget the other one.
Haitian Lawyers Association.
Haitian Lawyers Association, thank you. Who are assisting people every week at the Caleb Center in the city of Miami. And so folks are able to go in, preferably by appointment, but also by walk-in if they have availability to be seen. So let's, any other thoughts? I know we talked about a lot. We talked about what's happening with tenants, how regardless of what we saw happening at the state, Berbeth mentioned, the junk fees that are going to be passed through the tenants. We talked about the inability for local municipalities to have rent stabilization. We talked about some of the removal of the protections that we want in a tenant bill of rights, right? The right to repair and to deduct from the rent. We also named, all the things that are happening in specific to immigrant families in Florida, right? Folks who will be crossing the state lines, what could be possible. We also talked about if folks go to the hospital, whether or not they have to report, and their opportunity and the option to not say anything, right? Paula reminded us of our constitutional rights, that, right, we do have a right to remain silent. We don't have to sign documents that we don't understand. We have a right to ask for an attorney or to talk to someone at the consulate. And then AJ really let us be in the beginning in terms of really understanding all the components, or the popular components of the immigration bill. I'm going to pause and see if there are any other things that people want to add specifically to the panelists before we go into a question and answer.
So I can add a little bit of clarification on that DNA collection piece. So Florida's statutes already allow law enforcement to use reasonable force when a quote unquote, and this is what the statute says, a qualifying offender refuses to provide a DNA sample when it's required by law. So as of right now, before July 1st, that includes someone who's, for example, convicted of or arrested for any felony offense or attempted felony offense. And then it includes certain misdemeanors like stalking, voyeurism, child pornography. What SB 1718 does is it adds having an immigration detainer issued by a federal agency to the list of qualifying offenses. So what it does is it says that anyone who has an immigration detainer request that ICE sends, a lot of times it's called an ICE hold, that person is now considered a quote unquote qualifying offender. And so if they refuse to provide a DNA sample when it's, now that it's required by this law, then law enforcement can use reasonable force to collect it. So this is really concerning for me in particular, and for a lot of immigration attorneys, because ICE, those detainer requests, those ICE holds, those are civil in nature, and they have a reputation for being inaccurate. They're based on faulty databases, and have even inadvertently been issued to US citizens and legal permanent residents. And SPLC has litigated and is currently litigating some cases like that involve some wrongly issued ICE detainers. So I just wanted to clarify that, how it's just adding on to an already existing statute unnecessarily. And I think the argument that the sponsors made during the session, during the committee hearings, was to be able to track people who are undocumented, because they think that there's no other way to track people. And that's what the state wants to do.
Thank you, AJ. Anything else from some of our panelists before we go into a question and answer?
I just wanted to echo what AJ said earlier about the hospital forms. I think it's so important for those of us that are citizens, permanent residents, for us to really, as a way to stand in solidarity with the immigrant community, to really refuse to answer those questions on those forms. I think it's just one simple way that we can push back against some of these really discriminatory laws that we're seeing. And sometimes average people feel like, what can I do? And I think that that's a really important message for us to get down out to the community, is that is an act that anyone can do. And it really shows support for the immigrant community that's being targeted through this legislation.
Thank you, Berbeth.
And I would add one more thing if I could. Something that we're thinking about, like in protection, right? And when you think about your rights, what could folks be empowered with too, is just family protection plans, right? Like that's something that folks can do immediately and should be doing regardless if you're not a citizen, right? Because anything could happen, right? Even if you're, sorry, one second. I'm so sorry. I'm in an office right now. But that's something that folks can do immediately, right? We have some templates that we can send over to, and our Miami Worker Center has some resources as well around that. And so folks can, just put down, like, in case of an emergency, who can pick up your child, who can, make sure that they find your documents, it's sensitive documents, that they're put and organized in a specific location. Is there medication for an elder that maybe you're taking care of, or like someone that's living in your household? Just insurance information, right? Just like making sure that you're prepared for whatever might come, and also like how to prepare your loved ones in case of anything, right? Like it's something that, again, like we should think about for worst case scenarios, but that's something that, like, again, like it will help in the long term, and also for your family to also be empowered and your loved ones to be empowered as well. So I wanted to add that. And then one more thing is that we are doing a decline to answer campaign, and so we are able to share other information, but it's something that, again, like citizens and all folks can be in solidarity with immigrants to not answer that question, because it makes it harder for them to be able to track, period, and for there to be so much pressure for undocumented folks. If we all don't answer, right, like it just makes it normal, right? Like it makes it normal for us not to have to answer that question. And so just wanted to do that as a little bit of a call to action. And also, for folks to think about family preparedness as well.
Right. Thank you, Paula. You can share that form with us. We'll make sure that we can share it with our members as well. Because I think that's something that we've been thinking about, not only even under these circumstances in the state, but when emergencies happen in our day-to-day lives. Deborah, I saw you come off mute. Let's hear from you, and then we'll go into some questions.
No, I just wanted to mention, the original bill that was put in the floor was just horrible. For when we're speaking about Bill SB 1718, it was horrible. And I know that AJ mentioned it. A lot of people are relying on the original bill that was put on the floor and not knowing what was actually signed on May 10th. So I really advise everyone to actually know what was actually passed on May 10th, because it's definitely not as harsh and as horrible as what was originally put out, And I know earlier we mentioned the licenses from those 19 states. Although you are not able to use those licenses in Florida to drive, you can nevertheless use them as an ID, so as a social ID. So just to let everyone know, they're not completely invalid. You just cannot use them here to drive around.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I want to pause and see if there are any questions from some of the members who are at the Miami Worker Center, or folks who are on the Zoom as well. And look into our interpreters to also support with asking other questions as well. Any questions for our panelists today? I'm gonna take that as no. I think that y'all, we are so appreciative that y'all are here with us on a Friday night. We wouldn't be organizers if we didn't do a call to action. And so, folks have been calling all of us who are here in Florida, asking us, what are we doing? How do we feel? And our response continues to be that we will not give up on Florida. We will not leave Florida to be abandoned. I am a Floridian, we are Floridians, and we have a fight back. And so we're organizing and making sure that our communities, and the reason for this discussion this evening, one, know their rights, but also know that there are communities that exist that are thinking about how to keep each other safe. And also, what are we going to do to ensure that the folks who are in our legislature reflect our values and vote and make bills that we are actually asking for. And so there's so much that we can continue to do in this moment to make sure that 2024, 2026 looks different for us, and that we can have bills that are actually on the offenses for us to actually increase protections so that people can have access to healthcare, so that people can actually have fully funded public schools. And so that's the direction that we are actually planning and that we're organizing in this very moment. Specifically for Miami Worker Center, we are excited because our base of immigrant workers are launching a domestic worker bill of rights. We're going to be launching on June 17th at 11 a.m. at the government center. We're taking to the streets and letting folks know that the people who care for the elderly, the disabled, folks who have children, that they too deserve rights. They too deserve to make a living wage, to have the right for a written contract, to not be harassed on the job. And so for all the domestic workers, the nannies, house cleaners, and home health aides, this campaign is a collaborative between Miami Worker Center and We Count in South Dade. And we are demanding a domestic worker bill of rights in Miami-Dade County. And we hope all of our partners will join us. But also, most importantly, if you know of any home health aides, nannies, house cleaners, let them know about the Miami Worker Centers and We Count, and that we are planning to launch this, and we need as many domestic workers as possible to be able to win this. And so that's on the workers front. And again, overwhelmingly, immigrant workers who are caring for our loved ones when we're at work, when we're at school, and they make sure that it is possible for us to be doing what we're doing. On the tenant front, Miami Worker Center has a mass canvas every second Saturday, of the month. And so this coming Saturday, our tenants will be knocking doors in communities where there are building fights, but also folks who are on the eviction list as well, to make sure people know their rights, can get connected to attorneys, but also can join our meetings and begin to organize with their neighbors so that we can fight back against so much of the cruelty that we're seeing happening with tenants in our county. And so those are our call to action. We won't take it laying down. I say that, and we mean that Florida is ours, right? And that as much as people hear about what's happening in Florida, there are people in Florida fighting and standing up and making sure that our communities are protected, and those folks are here. And so I want to just say thank you so much to Berbeth with Community Justice Project, Paula with FLIC, AJ with Southern Poverty Law Center, and Mikhail with Office of New Americans and HLA, Haitian Lawyers Association. You've continued to offer yourselves free of charge to our communities. Y'all are family to us, and so much appreciation. I see Carmen off of mute. I don't know if you have a question, Carmen, but if she doesn't, I'm actually going into to wrap us for this evening. I think we can stop record, Lizzie.
Well, before we start recording, we just have to say thank you to you, Central. Thank you for always, literally, thank you for always making sure that information is shared with all the constituents, not only at Miami-Dade County. To be honest, those are recorded and shared everywhere. So thank you for your leadership and what you have been doing in our community. We need advocates like you to help everybody along. So thank you for what you do also.
Thank you. And thank you for the support team, the interpreters, as well as Lizzie, who's on tech tonight. I appreciate y'all, and I hope y'all have a great weekend. Again, we continue to fight for Florida. We are Florida. This state belongs to us, and we're not going without a fight, right? And so we're organizing, and that's our message to everyone that's watching us, to not just stand on the sidelines, but to get in the fight with us. And that's the philanthropy, that's the partners, that's the national orgs. Get off the sidelines and come and organize with us in Florida. So appreciation for y'all. And that's it. Thank y'all so much.